Now that we've talked about the possible functions of behavior, let's look at our data again. These are the questions we need to ask when we're looking at all the information we've gathered about the student. If we're considering that it may be escape or avoidance that is maintaining the behavior, we need to ask these questions. Does the behavior usually occur when a demand is put on the student? Does the behavior seldom occur when there are no demands? Do you just not see these behaviors maybe at recess or in loosely structured environments when not a lot is expected of the student? Does the behavior result in escape from demands? Is the behavior effective? If the student throws their pencil and the teacher sends the student to timeout whenever that occurs and then they miss the math lesson, that would tell us that, hey, maybe the escape is maintaining this behavior. Does attention from others not seem to impact the behavior? It doesn't really matter if I'm sitting with the student to do the math or if I'm not with the student. Either way, the student will react with behavior that results in them escaping the math. If we're considering that gaining a tangible, a form of positive reinforcement may be maintaining the behavior, we simply need to ask ourselves, does the behavior result in the student gaining the tangible? If we suspect that the behavior may be positive reinforcement through gaining a sensory input, we need to ask ourselves, does the behavior occur when there is no one around? Basically, is no one else contributing to this behavior or by what demands they're putting on the student or what attention they're giving the student? Does it simply occur when the student is even alone? And does the behavior happen in all settings? A good example, I work with a lot of children with autism, very young children with autism. Sometimes will engage in behaviors such as playing in water or pouring their food out or even throwing and breaking things that simply for the sensory input that they gain from that. And this behavior may occur when they're totally by themselves. It may actually be like almost a form of play. When that's the case, that student is getting some sensory input from that behavior that is reinforcing. If the team is considering that the behavior may be to gain the attention of others, they need to look at the data and see if the behavior generally occurs when the student is not getting attention from adults or others. And also, they just need to notice, does the behavior tend to draw attention from the adults in the classroom, peers, or as I mentioned once before, even just past people who are passing by? Now that we have analyzed our data, we're ready for step 4 of the process. Just to review quickly, step 1 was identifying our target behaviors and defining them. Step 2 was gathering information regarding those behaviors. Step 3 was analyzing that data and information to determine possible functions, which may be to escape something or to gain something. And now we're at step 4, which is where we develop a hypothesis regarding the possible function of each target behavior. This is an example of a hypothesis statement. When Charlie is presented with an academic task that requires handwriting, he takes his hands and pushes all the materials off of his desk, and then the teacher sends him to the timeout area, and Charlie escapes or avoids the assignment. The function of Charlie's behavior is possibly escape and avoidance. Now that we have our hypothesis regarding the possible functions of the target behaviors, we're ready to begin writing our plans. The first 4 steps led us through the functional behavioral assessment. The remaining steps will be the actual development of the plan. The first part of the plan should be a brief summary of the background information for that student. This may be helpful to those who are implementing the plan. This may include important information such as the student's ability level, their mode of communication, their major strengths and weaknesses, and maybe a brief history of some things in their environment or in their past that may have impacted their behavior. Step 6, we're going to go back to those target behaviors that we identified during our functional behavioral assessment and list those. These will be our target behaviors for decrease. It's very important that once again our definitions of those behaviors are observable and measurable. In step 7, we're going to actually identify our goals for increase. or our goals for replacement behaviors. It's very important when you identify the function of a behavior and you attempt to decrease that behavior that you are also at the same time teaching a replacement behavior that will serve the same or similar function. In step 8 of the behavior plan, the prevention interventions or antecedent interventions are identified. These are those changes we make to help reduce triggers or to reduce the reason for problem behaviors to occur. For example, it could be changing a student's schedule, changing a student's physical placement in the classroom. It may be to provide more attention to the student so that they will not need to act out to get that attention, or addressing sensory needs so that there's no need to act out to get those needs met as well. Remember that antecedent interventions are provided before problem behaviors occur and not in response to them. In other words, don't provide the sensory input after the behavior has occurred, or don't provide a new place for the student to sit after the behavior occurs. This is very important because the danger here is if we provide these interventions after the behavior occurs, we may be teaching the student to use that behavior to get access to what they need. Step 9 is the teaching interventions. This is the part of the behavior plan where we address the increased behaviors or the positive behaviors, the replacement behaviors that we want to teach. Sometimes this part of the behavior plan is the most neglected. It seems like people are very interested in talking about the difficult behaviors or the targeted behaviors for decrease, but they neglect to spend the time that is needed to really focus on how to teach those replacement behaviors and how to teach the behaviors we want to see. When you're developing your behavior plan, be sure to give adequate attention to this section. In step 10, of the behavior plan, the responding interventions are identified. This is a part of the behavior plan that your team may want to spend a long time on. Everyone will want to know, how do I respond when she does this, or how do I respond when he does that? This is the part that's very important that we are careful to be very specific in. We need to make sure that everyone knows how to respond to the behavior so that it doesn't continue to maintain or reinforce that behavior. In this section, you'll list the target behaviors and specifically how staff should respond to each behavior. It's acceptable to have a few options for some behaviors. It's not always necessary that staff respond the exact same way every time, but just to make sure that the way they're responding is not reinforcing the behavior. Be specific in describing responses. Remember the stranger test. Anyone looking at that plan should know exactly what we mean. This part of the behavior plan and the crisis plan should be kept in an easy access area as a reminder to all of the staff. Step 11 is optional. It's usually only included if a student has behavior that is sometimes dangerous or poses a safety risk. This is your crisis intervention plan. This is a plan for emergencies of how do we deal with the student's behavior in the event of an emergency. It's important that this is included so that crisis situations can be de-escalated quickly and in a way that is respectful of the student and the staff. Finally, the last step of our behavior plan is to continue to evaluate the effectiveness of our plan. This is an ongoing step. We should always analyze data regularly to evaluate if our interventions are effective. In analyzing data, we should look to see if the behaviors that we have targeted for decrease are decreasing, as well as looking at the behaviors goals that we have targeted for increase to see if they are increasing. If our behavior plan is not effective, we should reevaluate and consider other interventions and even reconsider our hypothesis. Perhaps we were not correct in what we determined was the function of the behavior. We should continuously adjust behavior plans to fit the data and what it indicates. In a nutshell, here are the 12 steps to developing a behavior plan. Our first 4 steps consist of our functional behavioral assessment, defining the target behavior, gathering information or data about the behavior, analyzing that information, and developing our hypothesis regarding the function of the behavior. The next several steps are the actual development of our plan. This plan should include a summary of important background information. It should include our list of our target behaviors that we want to decrease, as well as a list of goals for increase for replacement behaviors. It should include preventative interventions. How are we going to prevent the behavior from happening or reduce those triggers? Next, an actual list of how we're going to teach those replacement behaviors. What kinds of strategies are we going to use? Is it going to be social skills training? Is it going to be a reinforcement program, etc.? Next, we will have specific strategies on how the staff is to respond to the negative behaviors when they do occur. Number 11, remember, was our crisis interventions, which are sometimes included depending on the severity or the nature of the behavior that the student is exhibiting. And last but not least, number 12 is our ongoing step where we are continuously evaluating the effectiveness of our plan and adjusting it accordingly. This PowerPoint is a basic overview of all the steps of writing a behavior plan. In the next few modules, we'll go into more detail about some of these steps and provide you with information that will help you along the process.